So in this video, I'm going to be showing you guys step by step how we can safely, quickly and easily move a socket from here all the way across the room, because these days loads of people want sockets on walls for TVs and things like that, and they don't know how to move them. So I want to show you guys how to do that safely, quickly and easily. So I'm going to be putting a new double socket in this corner of the room over here, and the first thing I need to do is make sure I get my new socket over here at the same level as this one. Now you don't have to do that. If you're putting a TV on the wall, you can put your socket at any level, but you do have some restrictions with cable zones that I'll talk to you about later so that you stay within the regulations. The first step of the process is to choose the location for your new socket. Make sure you get it nice and level. Using a pencil, just mark the wall. So we've got a line there that tells us the height of our new socket. And what you'll need now is a metal back box. Now if you're doing this job on a stud wall or plasterboard wall, you'll need a plastic pattress box that is designed for plasterboard instead of one of these metal back boxes. This wall's a solid block wall, so we need one of these. Now using a pencil, I'll mark the final position of the socket on the wall. Make sure the box is level and then draw around it with a pencil. So we've now got a final position where our new socket needs to go. Now your new socket doesn't have to be at the same height as your old one. So say you're putting a TV on the wall, you could put your new socket here if you wanted to. But you do need to consider cable zones. Now cable zones are areas where you would commonly find a cable, and put it simply, they're done for that exact reason, so that you guys, when you look at a wall, would know where you're likely to find a cable, and that way you're less likely to drill into it or cut it. Now if you want to find out a lot more information about cable zones, when you finish watching this video, I'll put a little video at the end where you can learn loads more about them so that you make sure you don't cut through any cables or drill them whilst you're doing this job. But for the purpose of this video and placing our new socket, all we really need to know is where we can run our new cable. So let's say we wanted to place our new socket on the wall up here. And you wouldn't tape it normally, of course, but this is to give you an idea. We wouldn't then be able to run our new cable diagonally down to our existing socket like that, because that wouldn't be within a cable zone and therefore it would be outside the regulations, and that's not what we want. So scrap that. And what we need to do is this: run our cable vertically or horizontally from an accessory on the wall, i.e. a socket. And that would keep our new piece of cable within zones and within the regulations. People often get confused by this corner here and they think that you can't do that and you need to go up or down to the floor or ceiling, but that's not the case. The cable running here is horizontal from that accessory and the cable running down here is vertical from that accessory. So that is perfectly fine. You can do that. So that would be the location for the new cable if you were going to be putting a socket higher up on the wall, for example. But that's really just to cover a common scenario that you might come across. In my situation, my cable is going straight across the room, so as long as I keep it within the zone marked by the two sockets, that's perfectly fine. So we now need to check that we're not going to be cutting through any existing cables, and again, to do that, refer to the zones. But it's worth remembering that in the past, if changes have been made since your home was built, people may have ran cables outside of cable zones. So I would always recommend double checking with a detector like this one. I'll put a link to all these type of tools in the description if you need to grab one. What I would do if I were you is just run that detector up and down the wall where you want to cut your chase, just to make sure there's no cables in the wall or pipes, because this can be switched to the metal setting and you can check for pipes as well. Make sure you're not going to be cutting through any pipes or cables before you move on to the next step. And to quickly note, if your room's not being decorated, don't stick tape on the wall because it pulls off the paint. Luckily for me, this room's been decorated, so I'm not too worried. Ignore that, you never saw it. So the next step's where things get a little bit messy, because we need to chase a 30mm channel from our new socket location over to where our existing socket is, and it's going to be 30mm because I'm using oval conduit. That's not within regs. You can just put the cable in the wall and plaster over it if you want, but using conduit's good practice where you can, because it allows you to replace the cable in the future should there be any problems, and it protects the cable when you're plastering or filling over the top of it. So this is where it really does get messy. Because it's a solid wall, there's a lot more to chasing out. If it's just a plasterboard wall, you can use a multi-tool along that line we drew, and it's a lot easier. But because this is a solid wall, we've got to either use a grinder with a masonry disc on it, or if you've got access to one, a wall chaser. This is already set at 30mm, so of course it'll make a 30mm chase along the wall. I'm guessing more DIYers are going to have access to a grinder like this, which will do the job just fine and get ready for a massive cloud of dust as you cut along the chase. So you can use a chaser that gives you that kind of cut, but I'm guessing more of you out there are going to own a grinder, so I'm going to show you this method as well. Now if you're following along, you've probably just found out how messy this job is. Now you'll notice I stopped short of where the new box is going to be. I could have ran across with a grinder, but I want to show you how I remove this using chain drilling. So to do this, first of all, grab your 35mm or 25mm, depends what you're using. Grab an SDS drill bit. So we want to remove 35mm, mark the depth on the drill bit using some insulation tape, and that gives us a stop so that when we drill into the wall, we know how deep to go. And now we're going to drill a series of holes a few mil apart around the perimeter of the box. So we've got a series of holes. We can now either use a chisel on your SDS drill or a hammer and chisel to break out the area that we've drilled. So you can see that although this is a solid wall, these are a clay block. These clay blocks do give us a little bit more of a challenge because we have nothing to fix our metal box to. Now more commonly you guys might find cinder block or some other type of block or even brick, and if that is the case, using your chisel only remove 35mm. You obviously don't need to go any deeper than that because you'll then be fixing your box to the wall using these holes in the back and a couple of plugs and screws. So remove enough block or brick to allow the box to sit flush within the wall. So we know our box fits, we can remove that and leave that to the side for now. Now we'll run along with our chisel and just remove the material between the two cuts that we made earlier. So the conduit now fits in the chase. I'll fix that in shortly. What I'll do now is fit my box in nice and level. Like I said, if you have solid wall behind this, just use a couple of plugs and screws, get that box in nice and level using a spirit level, and make sure it's nice and flush with the surface of the wall. But I'm going to foam this in. I'll show you that little method quickly, and then we'll get on to some wiring. On any metal boxes like the one we're using today, you can see the knockouts for the cable to go through. Now those knockouts can be removed wherever you need the cable to enter or exit the back box. Now where the cable passes through the back box, we don't want it to touch any sharp metal. So before you install these boxes, just grab a pair of pliers and remove whatever knockout you need. And then what we need to use is one of these. This is a cable grommet. What you do is just pop that cable grommet into that little knockout there, and what that does is stops the cable from rubbing on the sharp metal. Right, so hopefully you won't need to foam your box in. You'd only really have to do this method on either these clay blocks or lava and plaster walls. So it's not really common, but if you are doing it this way, spray a little bit of water in there. That just makes the foam go off a little bit quicker. You want to use low expansion foam, and then you just fill up the void at the back. A little bit of water, and then place the box in. You set the box a few mil further back than you normally would, because once the foam expands, even though it's low expanding foam, it will push that box forward very slightly, and you don't want it to be proud from the surface of the wall. And in 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that, we'll be able to work with this box. So whilst the foam goes off, I'm going to move up the other end and show you the existing socket and how we're going to get the cable into this socket. Now, before you undertake any electrical work in your home, do make sure that you're competent and confident in undertaking basic electrical work, and if you're not, do give an electrician a call. Now, the first step of the electrical side of this job is to isolate the power to the circuit that you're working on. So go to your consumer unit or fuse box and isolate the relevant circuit, and if you're unsure which circuit that is, turn off the power to the home completely. Once you're sure that the power's turned off to this circuit, there's a couple of checks we can do. Before we remove the face of this socket, just use a socket tester to check that there's no power coming to the socket. Only then should we remove the face of the socket. Just undo the 2 screws. Gently pull that socket forward to expose the cables behind. Now, we used a socket tester and we're fairly confident that there's no power coming to this socket, but really, to be sure, I would advise using a voltage tester and proving unit. Prove that the voltage tester is working on the proving unit, test for voltage on the terminals in the back of the socket, and then prove the unit is still working. So we now know that there's no power coming to this socket and we're safe to work on it. So where we did this chase earlier, we now need to get the cable through to this back box here. But this is a very old back box and it doesn't have 20mm grommets. I'm going to use the existing box and I'll cut down some grommets to make them fit. To get my cable through to the new box, I'm going to start by chain drilling at the end of our chase. I'm then going to chisel through the remaining block until I can see the edge of the box and remove the knockout. And then, just like before, I pop a cable grommet in the hole. So the box is fixed and we're ready to now run our cable from the existing socket over to the new one. I'm now going to cut some oval conduit to length and then I'll use all round band to fix it in place. But we will be popping the conduit back out again to feed our cable through. And we're now about to wire this thing up. Before we do, if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you are by the end of this video, because you don't want to miss out on all the projects I've got coming up. And if the video's helped you, do me a massive favour and hit like. So taking a socket from an existing socket like we have here is called a spur. You're spurring off an existing socket on a ring main or a radial circuit. Now, if you're spurring off from a ring main like we are today, you're limited to one socket. You can only spur off once. So you can't do a spur like we are today and then do another spur from a spur. However, if your circuit is a radial circuit, you can have multiple spurs. Now, to power our new socket, what we're going to use is 2.5mm twin and earth cable. What we're going to do now is run this through our conduit from our existing socket over to our spur. Feed the cable through the grommet in your new socket, through the conduit, and then into the existing socket. So it should look something like this. You should have a piece of cable passing through from your existing socket all the way across through the piece of conduit to the new socket. So we're now going to connect our new socket up. It's really easy. I'll walk you through it step by step. And speaking of easy, that brings me on to the sponsor of this week's video, QuickWire. Now, if you're a regular watcher of the channel, you'll know that I've worked with QuickWire before on my downlight project, and I used their switch and load junction boxes and their incredibly quick and easy to use downlights. The best downlights I've ever used on any project that I've undertaken on the channel or otherwise, and that's simply because of the QuickWire connectors that make these so easy and quick to use. The QuickWire wire strippers make it really easy to strip off the correct amount and push the cable into their quick connectors. This is the same whether you're using the switch and load junction box, the QuickWire splitter, or the QuickWire downlights. So if you're a tradesman or a DIYer, make sure you check out QuickWire, because they are going to make your life so much easier. The link to their website and their great products is in the description down below. Thanks, QuickWire. Moving on to wiring, the first thing we're going to do is connect the new cable into our existing socket. Taking a look at the existing cables before we undo them, you can see we've got two cables coming in, so that is the ring in and ring out. You've got two red cables here. They are the live ones, and that is marked on the back of the socket there. You've got the two black wires here. They're the neutral wires, again marked on the back of the socket. And you've got this bare copper conductor, which is the earth wire, and that again is marked on the back of the socket. Often you'll find that the earth wire is sleeved in green and yellow sleeving. However, on older properties, you'll often find it unsleeved like this. Commonly, you'll also see a link wire going from the earth terminal here to the earth terminal on the back box to earth the box as well. Red and black are the old wiring colours. We're going to be working with the new wiring colours, and so that that doesn't get confusing, I'll put a little chart on the screen throughout the process so that you've got it in front of you. Start by stripping back your new cable to expose each of the conductors inside. You can then trim away the excess outer sheath and cut the cables to length. Now pop a piece of yellow and green earth sleeving over the bare copper conductor, which is your earth wire, also known as CPC. Strip back the end of the live conductor and neutral conductor. Starting with the neutral, we'll undo the terminal screw and pop the blue neutral wire in with the rest of the neutral wires, and then tighten up the terminal screw. Repeat that for the earth wire and also the earth link to the metal back box. And lastly, we'll repeat that for the brown wire, which is our live wire. Tighten up all the terminal screws and then give all the wires a little tug to make sure they don't pop out. Push the faceplate back to the wall, and then making sure it's nice and level, just tighten the screws. So that end's connected. Now moving across to our new socket, it's even easier because we've only got one cable to work with. So same as before, we'll strip the cable back. The only difference this time is we need to strip back a little bit more on the neutral and live conductors. That is because we're going to be doubling them back to go into the socket, because that way they'll have a better contact in the terminal. We don't need to do that if we've got multiple wires going into each terminal like we did on the existing socket over there. Again, you can see we've got a link wire going from our earth terminal to our metal back box. You won't need to do that if you're using a plasterboard box or plastic pattress box. You only need to do that on these metal back boxes. Just like before, put each wire in the corresponding terminals, check the terminal screws are nice and tight before giving each wire a little tug to make sure there's good contact. I'll leave the screws loose for now. I won't screw it all the way back to the wall because we need to do some repairs to the wall first. But before we do that, for those of you that want more help and want more from the channel in general, please check out the join button where you'll find the details to the DIY club. So now go and turn the power back on at the consumer unit or the fuse board, and once the power's back on, use a socket tester like this. First of all, on your new spur, plug that in. The green lights indicate the socket's working correctly. Test your original socket as well. And we now know that both of these are working perfectly and we've successfully added a socket. But one last thing to do, repair the wall, because of course we can't have this bit of conduit on show. So let's get that done and wrap the job up. First of all, make a PVA mix and mix that in a bucket. Now grab a brush and get plenty of that PVA mix in the chase. Work it in the chase well. And now we're going to use this British gypsum bonding, which is perfect for chasers and patching work. And we're going to mix that to a thick paste in a bucket. You can then use a big filling knife like this one to get some of that bonding into the chase. You can use a plastering trowel if you want. Work the bonding well into the chase, but make sure that you leave it a few millimeters low of the finished surface of the wall. And then just use something sharp to give it a bit of a key for the next coat. Once you've got the bonding in, let it go off for 1 to 2 hours until it's nice and dry, and then we'll get the second coat of filler over the top. Now we're going to be using Easy Fill, which is the best filler for this type of job, and we're going to mix that into a nice thick paste. And then we're going to fill over the top of our bonding, which will bring our chase up to the finished level of the wall. Because the Easy Fill is so easy to work with, it's actually perfect for filling around the socket as well. And then I just use my orbital sander with 180 grit sandpaper, and I give everything a good sand down so it's nice and flat and smooth. And by the time you've got a coat of paint on it, you'd never even know any work had been done. If you've enjoyed the video and found it helpful, hit one of these because there's so much more to learn, and I'll see you guys in the next one.